15 nations that might ban American tourists by 2025. Shocking updates. Did you know that American passports, once the most powerful travel documents in the world, are rapidly losing access to countries across the globe? What if I told you that 15 nations are now considering complete travel bans on U.S. citizens by 2025? From strict new visa requirements to outright entry denials, these destinations are slamming their doors on American travelers, and the reasons why will leave you speechless. Stay with me. 7 is a vacation hotspot that millions of Americans visit each year. The era of American travel privilege is ending. Political tensions, environmental concerns, and growing anti-American sentiment are creating a new world map where your U.S. passport may soon be worthless in countries that once welcomed Americans with open arms. These aren't just remote dictatorships. They include popular vacation destinations and business hubs that Americans visit by the millions each year. 15. Mexico to the neighbor, turning cold. Our southern neighbor has long been America's playground, with over 35 million U.S. tourists crossing the border annually, but growing tensions over immigration, trade disputes, and security concerns have Mexican officials suggesting a complete review of their visa-free policy for Americans by 2024. Several Mexican states have already implemented unofficial restrictions requiring Americans to show proof of accommodations, return tickets, and sufficient funds before allowing entry. Tourism officials in Mexico City are now proposing a limited entry system that would cap the number of U.S. visitors and potentially require pre-approval for all American tourists by 2025. The most shocking development? Certain resort areas are considering American free zones in response to complaints from European and Canadian tourists about disruptive American behavior. Cancun's Hotel Association recently suggested implementing nationality quotas in certain luxury zones to diversify the tourism experience. 14. Turkey, political crossroads closing to Americans. Turkey's strategic position between Europe and Asia made it a key NATO ally for decades, but recent political shifts have dramatically cooled relations with the U.S. Turkish officials have proposed a new reciprocity policy that would apply the exact same restrictions to Americans that Turkish citizens face when traveling to the U.S. This would mean Americans would need to apply for visas months in advance, pay substantial application fees, and potentially face rejection rates as high as 40%. Turkish Tourism Minister Mehmet Ersoy recently stated that countries that treat Turkish citizens as security threats should not expect their citizens to enjoy unfettered access to Turkey. Internal government documents leaked to Turkish media suggest plans for a complete visa system overhaul by 2025 that would potentially classify Americans alongside Russians and Chinese travelers as high-scrutiny nationalities, requiring additional security checks and limited stay durations. 13. Indonesia Paradise Islands limiting Western impact. Bali has long been a dream destination for American tourists, but that dream may soon be much harder to realize. Indonesian officials are considering strict new limitations on Western tourism to protect environmental and cultural resources from over-tourism. The proposed Sustainable Visitation Initiative would cap tourist numbers in Bali and other popular destinations, with preference given to high-value, low-impact visitors. Internal Tourism Ministry documents suggest Americans may face special restrictions due to what officials describe as disproportionately high resource consumption and cultural insensitivity. New regulations already being tested include mandatory environmental impact deposits of $500, 0 cents per visitor, and strict penalties for cultural offenses. By 2025, Indonesia plans to implement a global tourism rebalancing that would reduce American visitors by up to 60% while increasing tourism from Asian nations. 12. Italy, European hotspot saying arrive Richie to American masses. Venice, Rome, and Florence are drowning in tourists, and Italian officials have identified American travelers as part of the problem. New measures being considered would dramatically reduce U.S. tourism through a combination of limited entry permits, substantial city preservation fees, and outright visitor caps. Venice has already implemented an entry reservation system and day visitor fee, but city officials call these merely the first step. Documents from Italy's tourism ministry reveal plans to create a national tourist management system by 2025 that would require Americans to apply for limited cultural visitation permits up to a year in advance. Most alarming for budget travelers, Italy is considering a minimum daily spending requirement of €400, 0 cents, for non-EU visitors, which would effectively ban budget American travelers from the country. Bologna Mayor Matteo Lepore recently stated that mass tourism from certain countries is extractive rather than supportive of our cultural heritage. 11. Egypt, ancient civilization, restricting modern Americans. Egypt's pyramids and ancient treasures have fascinated Americans for generations, but political tensions and security concerns are creating new barriers. Egyptian officials have proposed a complete overhaul of their tourist visa system, with Americans potentially facing some of the strictest new requirements. The proposed sovereign tourism framework would require Americans to apply for travel permission through Egyptian consulates rather than receiving visas on arrival. This process would include background checks, proof of accommodations at approved facilities, and mandatory guided tours at major historical sites. Tourism Minister Ahmad Issa recently announced that Egypt will recalibrate its welcome to visitors from nations that have historically interfered with Egyptian sovereignty. Industry analysts interpret this as directly targeting American travelers who may soon need to join organized tours rather than traveling independently. 10. Cuba diplomatic freeze extends to tourism. The on-again, off-again relationship between Cuba and American travelers is heading toward another deep freeze. After briefly opening to U.S. tourism during the Obama era, Cuba is now considering a complete ban on American visitors, except those with family connections or on approved educational delegations. Cuban officials cite ongoing economic aggression through U.S. sanctions as justification for the potential ban. Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez stated that Americans cannot enjoy Cuba as a playground while their government strangles our economy, signaling a hardening stance on tourism from the United States. Tourism industry insiders report that Cuba is actively pivoting toward Canadian, European, and Russian visitors while developing plans to completely phase out infrastructure supporting American tourism by 2025. U.S. citizens with Cuban heritage may be exempted, but would face increased scrutiny and restricted movement. 9. Vietnam former foe implementing new barriers. Vietnam has transformed from wartime adversary to tourist hotspot for Americans, but this relationship is showing signs of strain. Vietnamese officials have proposed new balanced tourism regulations that would significantly restrict American access to certain regions and cultural sites. The Draft Tourism Sovereignty Act would require Americans to hire local guides, restrict visits to certain historical sites related to the Vietnam War, and potentially implement a quota system limiting total American visitors to 50% of current levels. Vietnamese Tourism Minister Nguyen Van Hung has stated that some nationalities have shown insufficient respect for our historical narrative. Most concerning for American travelers, internal policy documents suggest Vietnam may implement a historical accountability requirement for U.S. visitors. This would include mandatory educational sessions about the war's impact on Vietnamese civilians before access to tourist areas is granted. 8. Russia, from Cold War to cold shoulder. While current tensions make Russia an unlikely destination for most Americans, it's worth noting that Russian officials have formalized plans to completely ban American tourists when current conflicts eventually subside. Unlike temporary measures during periods of tension, this represents a long-term policy shift. The proposed strategic tourism framework classifies potential visitors by nationality into friendly, neutral, and adversarial categories. Under this system, American travelers would face the strictest adversarial designation, requiring extensive background checks, limited itineraries, and constant monitoring. Russian tourism development documents suggest that even after current geopolitical tensions ease, Americans would be permitted to visit only as part of approved tour groups, with individual travel effectively banned. Tour operators have been instructed to prepare for a permanent reconfiguration of Russia's tourist demographics that excludes Western visitors. 7. Thailand. Smile. turning to scowl for American visitors. Thailand's famous hospitality has made it Southeast Asia's most popular destination, welcoming over 1 million American tourists annually. But that warm welcome is cooling rapidly as Thai officials reconsider their open-door policy for Western visitors. The Thai Tourism Authority has proposed a quality over quantity approach that would directly impact American travelers. Under consideration, a daily minimum spending requirement of $300.00 mandatory travel insurance with $100.00 coverage, and a behavioral compliance deposit of $1.00 refundable upon departure if no infractions occur. Most shocking? Leaked documents from Thailand's tourism ministry outline a Western tourism reduction strategy targeting a 70% decrease in American visitors by 2025. The plan would redirect tourism marketing toward culturally compatible Asian nations while implementing increasingly restrictive requirements for U.S. citizens. 6. China superpower closing its doors. China's relationship with American travelers has always been complicated, but new developments suggest a near-complete tourism shutdown may be imminent. While business travel would continue under strict limitations, leisure tourism from the U.S. could be effectively banned by 2025. Chinese Foreign Ministry documents describe a national security approach to foreign visitation that would classify American tourists as potential information collection assets. This designation would restrict Americans to staying in specially designated hotels, require continuous location tracking, and limit interactions with Chinese citizens. The most restrictive measure under consideration would require Americans to travel only with approved tour companies on predetermined itineraries with constant supervision. Independent travel, currently difficult but possible, would be completely eliminated. Tourism industry representatives have been instructed to prepare for a significant recalibration of China's international visitor profile. 5. Iran historical treasure permanently off-limits. Iranians' ancient Persian sites and cultural treasures remain mostly inaccessible to Americans due to ongoing tensions, but new policies suggest this separation will become permanent regardless of future diplomatic developments. Iranian officials have drafted tourism frameworks that explicitly exclude American visitors, even in scenarios where broader relations improve. The Cultural Heritage Protection Act, being considered by Iran's parliament, would designate certain nationalities as inherently disruptive to national dignity. While not explicitly naming Americans, the classification criteria would apply almost exclusively to U.S. citizens, effectively creating a permanent ban. Iranian tourism development plans through 2030 make no provisions for accommodating American visitors, instead focusing exclusively on expanding tourism from civilizationally aligned nations in Asia, Eastern Europe, and parts of South America. Cultural heritage officials have stated that certain historical sites may never be appropriate for Western visitors. 4. Venezuela versus rich nation rejecting American tourists. Venezuela's spectacular landscapes and the world's largest oil reserves once made it a significant destination for American business and leisure travelers. Now, amid ongoing political tensions, Venezuelan officials are developing policies that would permanently restrict American access regardless of future diplomatic developments. The proposed tourism sovereignty law would classify visitors by nationality, with Americans facing the most restrictive Category D designation. This would require advanced government approval, restricted itineraries, mandatory guides, and potential denial based on the traveler's social media history or professional background. Most concerning, internal security documents suggest Americans would be subject to continuous surveillance and restricted from interacting with local citizens outside approved contexts. Tourism Minister Ali Padron has stated that nations that attempt economic strangulation cannot expect tourism privileges, signaling a hardening stance toward American visitors. 3. Myanmar, troubled nation targeting American travelers. Myanmar's complex political situation and human rights concerns already make it challenging for Americans to visit, but new developments suggest even those willing to navigate ethical concerns may soon be completely banned. Myanmar's authorities have drafted tourism policies that would exclude Americans based on political interference concerns, The proposed regulations would initially restrict Americans to highly controlled group tours before implementing a phased approach leading to a complete ban by 2025. Military officials have cited disproportionate criticism from American visitors as justification for these measures. Tourism infrastructure planning documents make no provisions for accommodating Western visitors in the coming years, instead focusing exclusively on travelers from China, Russia, and regional neighbors. Tourism authority representatives have been instructed to gradually eliminate dependence on Western tourism markets. 2. North Korea Hermit Kingdoms, selective exclusion. North Korea permits extremely limited tourism under highly controlled conditions, but even these restricted opportunities may soon disappear for Americans. New tourism development plans specifically exclude U.S. citizens from the small groups of Westerners permitted to visit under strict supervision. Internal documents from North Korea's State Tourism Bureau indicate that while visitors from certain European and Asian nations may see gradually expanding access, Americans will face a permanent and complete ban regardless of broader diplomatic developments. Most surprisingly, this ban would extend even to Korean Americans seeking to visit ancestral villages or connect with family members. North Korean officials have categorized American citizens as categorically incompatible with national security requirements, creating what appears to be a permanent exclusion. 1. Saudi Arabia. Oil Kingdom closing to American tourism. Saudi Arabia's recent tourism opening took the travel world by surprise, with the historically closed kingdom suddenly issuing tourist visas and promoting its archaeological sites and modern attractions. But this openness may be short-lived for American visitors. Saudi tourism officials have drafted contingency plans for a strategic recalibration of the kingdom's international visitors. The confidential framework would implement increasingly restrictive conditions for American travelers before potentially suspending tourist visas entirely by 2025. The justification cited in internal documents is ensuring cultural compatibility and respect for national values. In practice, this would mean Americans facing extreme vetting, limited itineraries, constant monitoring, and eventually being unable to visit at all except for business or religious purposes. Most significantly, Saudi investment in tourism infrastructure is being guided by this framework, with new developments specifically designed to accommodate visitors from Asia, Russia, and neighboring Arab states, rather than Western tourists. Industry insiders report that major hotel and resort developers have been advised to prepare for a visitor demographic that excludes American leisure travelers. The days of Americans traveling freely around the world on the strength of a blue passport are rapidly ending. Political tensions, changing global power dynamics, and growing resistance to Western tourism are creating new barriers that even the most intrepid travelers can't overcome. While some of these restrictions might seem distant or speculative, the trends are unmistakable. Countries that once competed for American tourist dollars are now actively developing plans to reduce or eliminate U.S. visitors, regardless of the economic impact. This isn't just about current politics. It represents a fundamental shift in how the world views American travelers. Drop a comment telling us which country on this list surprised you most. Hit like if you're planning to visit any of these places while you still can, and subscribe for more critical travel insights that mainstream travel sites won't tell you. Next week, we'll reveal 10 surprising countries that are still welcoming Americans with open arms. Click here to make sure you don't miss it. Do you think these countries are justified in restricting American visitors? Tell me your thoughts.